This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I hope you all had a happy holiday. I hope you all had a good, New Year's, everything like that. We got a lot to talk about in today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You can do it really easily, really quickly. Just go to the main page of our show, the GSMC Sports Podcast, and whatever you're listening to this on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see probably in the top right-hand corner-ish, or maybe even dead center, a little button that just has a plus sign next to it and also says subscribe. If you could hit that button for us, that would mean the absolute world to us. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this on. And again, you'll get those alerts and notifications, and you'll know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. When we release it, you won't have to go look at Twitter or just go, check casually. You'll get those alerts whenever they are released, and then you can, be one of the first people to listen to a new episode again when we release it. So please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on our main page, whatever application or even website you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, please subscribe to us on all those great platforms. We would really appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show, the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes with our great team as well. So if you're just enjoying the show overall, we'd love it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same main page, on that same website or application. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. You can leave us a review. If you want to write something, you can do that as well, but as long as you just leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that if you are enjoying the content of this show just in general. So again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, in general, anything like that. And also, if you could give us a follow on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Just overall, we would love to interact with you guys more on there. So if you follow us on all of those great social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over on social media, we can talk about sports. We can talk about, maybe some NFL playoff games, maybe whatever the main NBA game is on that night on TNT or ESPN. But just overall on social media, we can talk to you guys, again, about sports breaking news, about anything sports related that you guys want to talk about. Social media is the place to do that, especially in real time. Again, with the, landscape of the NFL and NBA always changing, player movement, games happening, trades, injuries, whatever it may be. Social media is the best way to find our immediate reaction, maybe, or something like that. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would absolutely love it. In addition to subscribing to the podcast and leaving us that review, if you could follow us on all those great social media platforms. One more time, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy, healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We have another fantastically packed show for you all today. I'm going to do a lot of future predicting here. There's some late breaking news in the NFL that I want to talk about with a certain quarterback and where he might potentially be going if he does indeed request a trade. I'll get to that in a few moments. Later on in the show, speaking of quarterbacks, I want to give you sort of my, perfect sort of, it's almost going to be like Tinder is how I'm going to describe it. There's a lot of teams in the NFL with some quarterback concerns heading into next year, some playoff teams, some non-playoff teams, and I want to give you their perfect match, their super like on Tinder, if you will. I want to give them that. That's coming on later on in the show. So what quarterback who might be a free agent, might be a draft prospect, might be somebody who could be traded, I want to pair them with a team that maybe has a quarterback controversy heading into next year, or maybe just straight up doesn't have a starting quarterback period next year. I want to find those perfect matches for you guys, so that's coming on later on in the show. As well, this is my last show before the Saturday games for the NFL. You won't hear from me again until Sunday, so we'll already know the result of the 3 Saturday playoff games. So also later on in the show, I am going to preview those 3 Saturday games. I won't talk a lot about the Sunday games, but definitely the Saturday playoff games. We will get into that. I will give you my prediction for all 3 of those games and why I have who I have winning. That's also coming on later on the show. In the final segment of today's show, I want to get to a specific NBA player who we talked about moving at the very beginning of the offseason. Things sort of went quiet, and I want to tell you why he might be the missing piece to a lot of potential championship teams, specifically one team that's struggling to get going so far in the NBA season. We'll get into all that good stuff at the end of the show. But of course, we are going to start off with some late-breaking news in the NFL today, and these rumors really have been circulating the past couple of days, and they all revolve around Texan quarterback Deshaun Watson. So after the Houston Texans signed their new general manager from the New England Patriots, Deshaun Watson pretty much, not immediately, but I think it was within 12 hours. So essentially, if you didn't know, the Houston Texans signed Nick Cassiero, I believe is how you say his name. He was like the head of player development / scouting / drafting. He didn't have a clear-cut title for the New England Patriots. I knew it was player development and like just sort of overall looking for prospects, looking for free agents, things like that. He's the new general manager of the Houston Texans, and if you remember when Bill O'Brien was initially fired, I believe, or he might have stepped down as coach first. I don't exactly remember before. They wanted to hire him, but Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots blocked the interview. They were in the middle of a playoff push. Teams have the right to do that, and he was not hired by Houston about a year ago. Now Houston gets their wish and finally gets their guy, and I think a little bit, I don't know if it was the next day, within 12 hours, Deshaun Watson tweeted a very cryptic tweet that said, "Some things never change, ... Started some fueling, some speculation, some rumors about Deshaun Watson. I don't like to read too much into tweets, cryptic or not cryptic. I don't think a lot of athletes, request trades via social media. I didn't really expect it. So I was going to talk about it today and just sort of tell you it's nonsense. I don't think they're going to trade Deshaun Watson, and I'm still upon that boat. I don't think they're going to trade Deshaun Watson. But now there have been some more reports and some more clarity, specifically from both Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter, and to pretty much clarify Deshaun Watson's unhappiness with the Houston Texans. According to Ian Rappaport, Deshaun Watson has not spoken to Texas ownership / the new GM in the last few days, though they have tried to call him. Ian Rappaport also went on to say Deshaun Watson is extremely unhappy with the organization after owner Cal McNair informed him he would be involved in the GM and coach hiring process and provide feedback, but they did neither in the hire of GM Nick Cassiero. So it appears that Deshaun Watson was promised by the owner that, hey, we know that we're not doing right by you right now. We might have given you that contract, but they obviously had a terrible losing season this year, 3rd worst in the NFL. Obviously, they don't own the pick, the Dolphins do, but they're still the 3rd worst team in the NFL. You saw that speech that J.J. Watt gave about not trying, things like that. They already got rid of Hopkins the year prior, so things were not going well in regards to on the field for Deshaun Watson. He's put up great personal stats, obviously became the 2nd highest paid quarterback in the NFL, deservingly so in my opinion. And he wanted some feedback. He wanted to have a hand in picking his next general manager, his next head coach, to see how they could, lead the way to a potential Super Bowl path there in Houston. And he obviously didn't get that with at least the general manager hire. So he hasn't spoken to them in a few days. Again, does this mean he has necessarily requested a trade from the Houston Texans? No, there has been no report that has said that. But usually in the NFL, in the NBA, specifically more in the NBA maybe than in the NFL, people who don't speak to their management, don't speak to the GM, don't speak to, brass or whatever you want to call it high up in the organization for a few days, even though they're trying to contact them, that means there's something there. James Harden did it in Houston, and he obviously wants out, hasn't been traded yet, but wants out. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Deshaun Watson decided that he wanted out of the Houston Texans organization and wanted to be traded. Will that happen, though, is another question because, again, the NBA and the NFL are very different when it comes to the trading of superstars. A lot of guys in the NFL get frustrated, want out, want to be moved, yada yada this, yada yada that, and a lot of times they don't get their wish. They get franchise tagged, they have to stay, they don't get traded, things like that. They hold out camps. We see it all the time in the NFL. The issue with Deshaun Watson is the absolute mega deal that he just signed. Not many teams in the NFL are going to be able to afford it. When you look at the list of teams, a lot of them are rebuilding teams, super young teams. The only team that I can see that could potentially afford him, if everything made a lot of sense and things sort of broke the right way in free agency, that might be contending, in my opinion, there's three of them: the New England Patriots, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Miami Dolphins. Those are three teams that are contending that I see right now that could somehow make the money work. San Francisco is on that outside bubble of that after looking at their salary cap sheet, as well as they have to pay a guy like Nick Bosa in the next few years, Deebo Samuel in the next couple of years there. They have some money, not a ton in comparison to Miami, Indianapolis, New England. Those are just contending teams that can afford them. Of course, a team like Jacksonville, the New York Jets, some of these teams that are picking high at the top of the draft, not because they made a trade, but just because of their poor play, could obviously afford Deshaun Watson as well. But I'm assuming Deshaun Watson would want to be traded to a team that he believes he can win with sooner rather than later. And those are the three teams that immediately came to mind to me, with San Francisco being fourth. Again, San Francisco does make a lot of sense. They already have the defense. They already have the weapons. I think they already have the coach in Kyle Shanahan. I know he doesn't prove to be the greatest in specifically Super Bowls, but he's won plenty of playoff games. He's won plenty of divisions. At least he did last year. And again, you have to remember that division is a really hard division, probably the best in all of football. On top of all that, they were absolutely decimated by injuries on both sides of the ball. And while I do believe that they're going to move off of Jimmy Garoppolo, Deshaun Watson would absolutely be the perfect fit for them. Leadership, one in high school, one in college, was winning in the pros up until this year, can ad-lib with his feet, obviously, can make every single throw you want. Again, I think Deshaun Watson's probably a top 5-6 quarterback in this league, easily top 10 in my opinion. I don't have a ranking system in front of me, but if I had to guess, Deshaun Watson would definitely be up there. I've told you I'd take him over a guy like Lamar Jackson. And again, when it comes to young quarterbacks in this league, I would put Patrick Mahomes one. I'd still, I know I ranted and raved about Josh Allen last episode, and I absolutely love the season he's having. I'd still put Watson ahead of him, just because I know Watson has done it over a consistent level of time for a couple of years now, and in the playoffs at the highest level of competition. Not saying Josh Allen can't reach that status or isn't already there necessarily, but we haven't seen Josh Allen win a playoff game yet. We haven't seen Josh Allen maybe in these fourth quarter close games as consistently as we've seen Deshaun Watson. Again, no shade or anything like that, but Deshaun Watson, I think, is an undervalued quarterback in this league. He is the second highest paid quarterback in the league for a reason, and while his team didn't win this year, that was no fault of his own. He led the league in passing yards, had one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the entire country. At the end of the day, he just wants to win, and I don't know if Houston can offer him that in the near future. There is no clear path on how Houston gets good quickly, and if Deshaun Watson is frustrated that the owner, again, who promised him an opportunity to have a hand in the next hiring of the GM and the coach, doesn't fulfill that promise, there is something there. And again, I'm not saying Deshaun's either going to request a trade or Houston would even be willing to trade him after signing that huge contract extension. But at the end of the day, it is something to monitor, because again, when organizations and star athletes, specifically star quarterbacks, guy who's supposed to be the face of your franchise, the captain of your franchise, isn't communicating with the owner, isn't communicating with the higher-ups in the organization, there's a rift there and there's an issue. Again, it can be fixed. I'm not saying Deshaun will be traded, and if I had to bet money on it versus Deshaun being traded versus not being traded, I would tell you that Deshaun Watson's probably not going to be traded, that Deshaun seems to be like a team-first guy, and he would try to work it out with the new GM and potentially a new head coaching hire. Josh McDaniels comes to mind, another Patriot guy, something like that. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't surprise me at all. We're in a new generation of athletes, new generation of demanding and requesting trades. We've seen it in the NBA, player empowerment, player movement. It's not as common in the NFL. Maybe Deshaun Watson starts that, though. We don't see a lot of quarterback movement in the NFL. We saw maybe, who were the guys that moved? Brady this year, but that wasn't necessarily a big surprise by the end of the year. Brett Favre obviously going to Minnesota. Back in the day, that wasn't a big surprise during the day after they were ready to commit to Aaron Rodgers. I think of a guy like Kirk Cousins, who moved from Washington to Minnesota. It works, kind of, not really, but star quarterbacks under 27 years old moving, that's something that's pretty much unheard of in the NFL. Deshaun Watson could potentially be the first. For a couple of teams, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, that could potentially look after him. I've mentioned the four, and this is why I have these four. Of course, there's a bunch of other teams. I could see Jacksonville, of course, being interested. I think they'd stick on to Trevor Lawrence. I could see the New York Jets offering the second overall pick, Mekhi Becton, picks everywhere galore. People have been speculating the Miami Dolphins should trade Tua Tagovailoa, the 3rd pick, the 18th pick, and 2 second-round picks. I don't know if Miami's willing to do that. They would kill their cap space. They'd have a quarterback in the defense, but where are the weapons coming from? Similar issues, and I don't know if they're ready to give up on Tua Tagovailoa just yet. People are talking about the Saints. Again, they're projected to be, I think, over $90 million in cap next year. They have enough cap issues as it is. I don't think they could add a guy like Deshaun Watson. Again, people talk about Pittsburgh, but again, another team with some cap issues. Are they going to pay Juju? Are they not? TJ Watt's going to be asking for a contract soon. Mika Fitzpatrick's going to be asking for a contract soon. Who knows how much longer Big Ben wants to play. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of questions with some of those immediate contending teams that maybe Deshaun Watson would love to go to in a heartbeat. Not sure if they're going to be able to make that happen. But the 3 teams that could do something, in my opinion, besides San Francisco, are Miami, Indianapolis, and potentially a team like the New England Patriots. However, I don't think either of those 3 teams are going to land Deshaun Watson if he's traded. So let's break it down team by team. I've already sort of speculated a little bit about Miami. Again, it makes sense at the base level, right? There's some questions about Tua Tagovailoa. It didn't have the greatest rookie season. Showed some moments, showed some flashes for sure in that Arizona game, in that Bengal game, in that Chief game, but then really shrunk in some other moments against the Raiders and against the Bills, where it makes you wonder if he is the guy for the future. Miami has remained committed to him. Chris Greer came out and said he's the starter in 2021 and beyond. Again, we've seen this all the time with teams lying and things come up, obviously. We saw what happened with Rosen and Kyler Murray and everything like that. I do believe Miami when they say they're committed to Tua Tagovailoa. They have a lot of cap space and a lot of draft capital. I don't know if they envisioned wasting both of those things on a guy like Deshaun Watson. But then again, a guy like Deshaun Watson doesn't come up freely very often. A potential trade package could look like, again, Tua Tagovailoa, that 3rd pick, that 18th pick, and their 2 second-round picks. Will this happen? No, I don't think that's going to happen. While they're one of the teams that makes sense for both Watson and the Dolphins, I don't think this is the route that the Miami Dolphins are going. Again, Watson, if there was a short list, I'm assuming Miami would be on there due to their head coaching, sort of surgence with Brian Flores, their defensive surgence with Xavier Howard and all that, and of course they still have the money to pay Deshaun and all the draft capital. It's just easy to put those 2 things together, but in my opinion, the Miami Dolphins aren't going to go that route. Now let's talk about Indianapolis. This is a team I can see making a strong push for Deshaun Watson. They have the cap space. They've been willing to move draft capital in the past for superstars. They moved their 1st-round pick last year for DeForest Buckner. We know Phillip Rivers is retiring at the end of the year. They have a young stud running back in Jonathan Taylor, an incredible offensive line, and already a better line and defense and coach and weapons. Everything there is better in Indianapolis than it is in Houston. There's just one issue. Why would Houston trade to a division rival? Would you want to see Deshaun Watson 2 times a year for the next 10 to 15 years? If you're Houston, you can't do that. You can't make that move. That doesn't make any sense for them. You don't want your fan base to be already pissed off enough with you that you're trading Deshaun Watson, but after that, have no answer at quarterback, no answer potentially at coach, and you have to face a guy like Deshaun Watson twice a year. Even if the Texans rebuild goes incredible from there, where they find their quarterback, they find their guy, are we sure that Frank Wright, Deshaun Watson, and this Indianapolis Colts roster doesn't run that division for the next 10 years, no matter how good Houston could get after that, no matter how good Tennessee is? So again, it makes a lot of sense for both of those sides to try to make a deal. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for the Texans to move off of Watson, despite Watson might wanting to go to a team like Indianapolis. And finally is the doomsday option that everybody is absolutely terrified of. What if Deshaun Watson ends up with the New England Patriots? He won't. And let me tell you for a few reasons. If you're the Houston Texans, right? You want to move off of Deshaun Watson. You want to start this full-fledged rebuild, or maybe you don't want to move off of Watson, but he wants out, and he won't play. He'll hold out. He'll do all of that stuff, so you got to move him, right? And at the end of the day, a team like New England is going to offer the picks that they have. It's going to offer maybe a couple of their young players, a guy, I don't know how many young players they have, a guy like Kyle Duggar maybe. Maybe they'll throw in a J.C. Jackson. Again, I don't want to overcompensate here, but at the end of the day, throwing out these names, you might think, oh, I'm crazy. That's too much to give up in a mock trade. J.C. Jackson was just second in the league in interceptions. Deshaun Watson's a superstar quarterback in this league. He is 25 years old, I believe, and just led the league in passing yards with one of the worst offensive weaponry and cores in the entire NFL. You give up J.C. Jackson for that. You give up, if Miami wants to, Tua Tagovailoa on the 3rd pick. If that's what you want to do. Again, I'm not saying that's what I would do. I'm not saying that's what Miami's going to do. But again, if you're New England, it just makes sense. Get Deshaun in there. He's used to playing with lack of weapons. You have the coach, you have the defense, and let's rerun the AFC East again for the next 10 years. And again, I understand you make the connection. Nick Cassiero is the new GM. There's a connection with Belichick and a couple of things there. So again, it's an easy thing to put together. Here's a couple reasons why it's not going to happen. Who knows if Nick Cassiero's relationship with Bill Belichick is all great and good. Again, if you remember, Nick Cassiero wanted this job last year. Houston wanted to hire him last year, but Bill Belichick rejected the interview, did not let him leave. He essentially franchise tagged him, is essentially what he did. So maybe Nick Cassiero is not as thrilled and happy with Bill Belichick as maybe some people believe it to be. Again, he could have had this extremely high-paying job and DeAndre Hopkins a year ago. Instead, he's stuck with this current Texans roster and Deshaun Watson, obviously now some turmoil with everything with there. Second of all, if you're Houston, you want to trade Deshaun Watson, assuming you're going to get a ton of draft capital, because again, not many contracts in the NFL that are at least worth it match up with Deshaun's. You're not going to get a clean swap, and you're already going to lose on this trade no matter what. No matter what they get in compensation, Houston most likely is going to lose this trade unless they draft the next John Elway, unless they somehow get a Trevor Lawrence type of prospect, things like that. And even then, who knows how a guy would develop like that. You already know what Deshaun Watson can do essentially at the biggest stage, so you're never going to get fair value in this. But if you were going to trade Deshaun Watson, wouldn't you want to trade him to a team, to an organization that even how good he can be and will be in his prime, which he hasn't even reached yet, can't save that organization? Wouldn't you want to trade him to a team like Jacksonville, to a team like the Jets, to a team that is bottom feeding of the NFL in terms of organizational structure and coaches and weaponry? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be inheriting that team's first round picks for probably the next 2 or 3 seasons. So if you trade him to New England, wouldn't you just be getting bottom picks of the first round, bottom picks in the second round for the next 3 years? How quickly does that accelerate your rebuild? How quickly does that allow you to turn around this franchise from one of the worst in the league to one of the best? Again, that's not something that's realistic if you're picking in the late 20s, maybe even all the way to 32nd if Bill Belichick does get his hands on Deshaun Watson. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Houston Texans to move Deshaun Watson to any of the teams I've mentioned. Again, Miami makes a little bit more sense because they already have a quarterback to offer Houston, Tua Tagovailoa, and all the way up there at the 3rd overall pick. So there is some enticements there, and a lot of people have been talking about it on Twitter. I don't think that happens. If there is somewhere where Deshaun Watson is going to go, I think it'll be San Francisco. And now I told you, I don't think that they're going to be able to make it work because of some money issues. They have to pay a guy like Debo in the next 3 seasons, Nick Bosa in the next 3 seasons, some of these other young studs on that team. But, John Lynch has shown the ability to go all in on a Super Bowl. They were just a Super Bowl a little under a year ago up until this point. They could sell their soul. They could give you the RG3 deal, the Jared Goff, Carson Wentz deal that some of these teams traded up for. Here's our first round pick for the next 4 or 5 seasons, right? Kicking it way out in the future where we don't know what's going to happen down there, and do that first and second round picks in the next 5 years, throw in a guy like Debo. Maybe you have to throw in a guy like Nick Bosa, not including all 5 first round picks, but you just mix and match your assets and draft picks, because we're talking about a superstar quarterback who has the ability to win MVPs in this league and win Super Bowls and win Super Bowl MVPs. Deshaun Watson has that ability. If any contending team is going to trade for Deshaun Watson, the one that I could point a finger and say, this one might happen, is San Francisco. You trade him out of conference, out of division, obviously, far and away from your team and your fan base where they won't have to see him unless it's in a Super Bowl or something like that, and restart from there. And again, maybe you're going to get a King's Ransom, Godfather offer you can't refuse type deal from San Francisco. If I had to guess where Deshaun Watson would go if he was traded, I'd honestly say the New York Jets or San Francisco. The Jets could offer the 2nd overall pick, Mekhi Becton, and some of their other young pieces / draft picks, and then Houston starts off with Laramie Tunsil and Becton on the, bookending the tackle spot, using the number 2 overall pick on a guy like Justin Fields, and all of a sudden you have a little bit of a young core you could sell to your fan base going forward, not to mention the Jets have the draft capital. Will Deshaun Watson be traded at the end of the day? I don't believe so, but it's a talking point and something we have to at least consider, specifically when a guy like Deshaun Watson, who's team first, leader first, has no character concerns, is not speaking to the brass of the organization. So it's something to monitor. It's a fun thing to talk about. It's always fun to talk about trade rumors. The doomsday idea, of course, if Deshaun Watson gets, traded to the Patriots and meets up with Bill Belichick. At the end of the day, I don't see Deshaun Watson being traded. I see him coming out and making amends with the ownership group and the new GM, and maybe he has a hand in picking the next head coach, something like that. But at the end of the day, it definitely is something to monitor. And isn't it awesome that in sports we always just have something new every single day? On my radar is the playoffs and the NBA, and the first thing I'm talking about is a potential Deshaun Watson trade. Sports get better every single day for me. I hope you guys feel the same way. All right, we're going to take a short break here. On the other side of this short break, we're going to get right back into the QB carousel, the thing I was hinting at the beginning of the show, playing sort of a Tinder-like game. Let's match up, sort of soulmates with some of these quarterbacks that are looking for a home and some of these teams that are looking for a quarterback potentially next year. We'll play the sort of perfect link game next segment right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, if you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished talking about everything Deshaun Watson rumors. A little bit of an update for you. Albert Breer has come out and said that one of the reasons why Deshaun Watson is unhappy is that he really advocated for the Houston Texans to go after a guy like Eric Bieniemy, who is the current offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Houston Texans haven't even, at least to this point, put in an interview request for him, which is interesting to say the least. Again, I don't expect Deshaun Watson to be traded. It's very rare these guys ever become available, just in general via trade or something like that. I don't expect him to be moved. I expect Houston to move heaven and earth to make him happy there, even if they don't hire the GM or coach that he wants. After those hires, they still will do whatever he wants, I believe, because you can't lose a guy like Deshaun Watson. Again, there's just not a lot of teams that make sense financially or for Houston to trade to. Again, like Indianapolis makes a ton of sense, but why would Houston move into a division rival? New England makes a lot of sense, but why would Houston move him to New England so they can just pick in the late 30s every single year or high 30s or, low 20s, things like that. And in Miami, like some people are talking about, is Brian Flores really already willing to move off of Tua Tagovailoa? And while maybe that answer might be yes, because you're getting Deshaun Watson, your cap space would completely evaporate. Your draft capital that you've stocked up the last 2 years would evaporate. Maybe you could argue that that's why you got the draft capital, but again, to move off of a rookie quarterback after year one like that, one especially with a great touchdown to interception ratio and a winning record, a team that should have made the playoffs in a normal year, it's just for whatever reason the AFC was stacked this year. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense for Miami, but again, I could see it maybe. Then you got the teams like the Jets, the Jags, the bottom feeders of the NFL who are willing to do anything. But would Deshaun want to play there, right? Would he rather just hang it out and, wait it out in Texas with the Houston Texans maybe? So there's just a lot of factors. I don't expect him to be moved, but it's definitely something to monitor. Speaking of NFL quarterbacks and specifically them changing teams, I want to do a little bit of a game here. I've been comparing it to Tinder or like a dating game. I want some of these NFL teams to find their soulmate or just maybe their next partner, if you want to view it that way. There's a lot of teams in the NFL, despite we have a lot of good quarterback play, we have a lot of great young quarterback play in the NFL right now, there's still a ton of teams that have quarterback concerns. Right now, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, round 10 or 11 teams that have quarterback concerns, questions. It's not a guarantee that they're moving with this guy for the future or something like that. So let's get right into it here. There's a lot of them. You'll see some, it's going to happen. There's some names that are on from multiple teams, but I tried to limit to one guy per team. It gets a little bit sketchy towards the end, just given how many teams might be looking at a new quarterback, but let's get right into it here. So the first team that obviously needs a new quarterback is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were the worst team in the NFL last season by far, even worse than the New York Jets, who I projected to literally win 0 games. Jacksonville is only going to win, I think it's over now. Yes, they've only won 1 game this year. They're picking first overall. They obviously need a quarterback. Gardner Minshew was fun, not the answer. I don't need to get into Jake Luton or anything like that. We know that they need a quarterback, and obviously their soulmate, their perfect match, is a guy in Trevor Lawrence. First overall pick. It's going to happen, folks. Don't buy into any late rumors that, if they hire Urban Meyer, they're going to go after Justin Fields. Trevor Lawrence will be the first overall pick in this NFL draft if Trevor Lawrence wants to be. The only way the Jacksonville Jaguars do not draft Trevor Lawrence is if Trevor Lawrence tells the Jaguars, I'm refusing to play for you. An Eli Manning type of thing. I don't expect that to happen. He's already declared for the draft. He didn't win the national championship at Clemson. He got knocked out in the first round by Ohio State and Justin Fields with an absolutely incredible game by Justin Fields, by the way, who we'll get to in a second here. But he's still the number 1 overall pick. The man is 6'6", can run, make every throw. He's elite at every trait. He's won at every level. He's won a national championship. At 19 years old, he torched Nick Saban, who at the time had 4 first-round picks at receivers, multiple NFL players on the defensive end, and Tua Tagovailoa was the quarterback of that team. He was just a top 5 NFL draft pick and might be the future of the Miami Dolphins, at least I believe. So at the end of the day, that was a stacked Alabama team. He annihilated them at 19 years old. Never won a championship after that. Didn't win the Heisman Trophy either. That went to Devonta Smith. No shade towards him or anything like that. But Trevor Lawrence is 100% the number 1 overall pick this year. The comparison that I make every time is John Elway. Not that he is the next John Elway, but he's that level of a prospect. He's up there with Elway, with Luck, with Peyton Manning, as these absolutely elite, can't bust NFL quarterback prospects. And while he might not win a ton of games in Jacksonville, what he will do is put up numbers and he won't be a bust, right? At worst case scenario, he's a Matt Stafford, but better, right? Better stats than Matt Stafford, more touchdowns than Matt Stafford, but never gets, to win because of his inability in the front office or something like that. I don't necessarily say that Jacksonville's going to have that for Trevor Lawrence. Again, we don't know who their new GM or new coach is. But Trevor Lawrence is a can't-miss prospect. He is not a bust. There's no chance of it, in my opinion, unless there's some crazy injury that derails him. Again, the comparison I make is John Elway. He plays similarly. He just looks similar, not in the face or anything, but just build and size-wise. That's what he reminds me of. Andrew Luck with a bigger arm, you could argue, too. More mobile Andrew Luck. Essentially what you're seeing with Justin Herbert right now, which is absolutely incredible. Give me, if you put Justin Herbert in like that tank that they put Captain America in, if you've ever seen that movie that made him all ripped and everything like that. That's what Trevor Lawrence is. And Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion, will most likely break every single quarterback rookie record next year, even the one that Justin Herbert just broke, in my opinion. He is that good. So, of course, to make a long story short, Jacksonville's soulmate is obviously Trevor Lawrence. So, they obviously need the quarterback, and their number 1, Trevor Lawrence, to the Jacksonville Jaguars, in my opinion, is the perfect match. Then we have the New York Jets. They're picking number 2. It's unclear. Will they hang on to Sam Darnold? Will they move off of Sam Darnold and look for a new guy? In my opinion, they're going to move off of Sam. Nothing that has shown me out of Sam Darnold. He clearly cannot carry this organization. Not to throw shade on Sam Darnold, I think he will get another opportunity elsewhere. And in my opinion, Sam Darnold is a franchise quarterback. He makes enough plays. He's a gamer. He seems like the type of guy that elevates under pressure. Yeah, he throws a lot of picks, but at the end of the day, his team is usually down and he's trying to throw his team back into the game. He needs to go to a team that has better weapons, more stability in the organization, and isn't Sam Darnold reliant. The Jets are Sam Darnold reliant the same way that the Seahawks are Russell Wilson reliant and the Cardinals are Kyler Murray reliant, where if they don't perform at their absolute best every single snap of the game, good things won't happen. And the Jets are not the type of organization that can do that for Sam Darnold. They can't rely on a guy like Sam Darnold's not the guy to be relied on at that level. I think he's a franchise guy. I think he could be an elite quarterback in this league. He's still obviously very young, but he's not the type of guy that you can give him crap and he'll make, chicken salad out of chicken bleep, if you know what I'm saying. He's not that type of quarterback, and a lot of guys aren't. So they're, I think, are going to move off of Sam Darnold. He needs a fresh start. The organization needs a fresh start. And in my opinion, I think they should take Justin Fields. I understand the Zach Wilson hype, and I will talk about him on this list. He has had an incredible year at BYU. He shows the arm. He shows the mobility. He has the size. He appears to have the leadership qualities. As far as we know, I don't see a character concern, at least. There hasn't been one reported. But I don't understand the knock on Justin Fields. Justin Fields, in my opinion, is still the clear-cut number 2 draft prospect, at least for quarterbacks in this draft. And I understand that every single year there is a guy that shoots up the draft boards because of an incredible year they had out of nowhere. Think of Baker Mayfield, think of Kyler Murray, think of Joe Burrow, obviously, and now it seems to be that Zach Wilson is that type of guy. I understand the hype. He's definitely an NFL prospect. In my opinion, he's definitely the 3rd best quarterback in this draft class, but I have him a clear tier below a guy like Justin Fields. I watch Justin Fields and I look at, and when I watch him, I see 6'3" Russell Wilson. I see Russell Wilson but taller. He can move. He has the toughness. He has the leadership qualities. He has an absolute cannon of an arm. And this Ohio State team is worse than the Ohio State team last year in terms of roster, in terms of weaponry for him. And he's elevated. The biggest game of his life was against that Clemson game. He had a chip on his shoulder. I'm pretty sure he broke a couple of ribs, and he threw absolute nukes all over Dabo Swinney in that Clemson defense, and quite frankly outplayed Trevor Lawrence in that specific game. Again, I wouldn't put him above Trevor Lawrence, but in my opinion, he is a clear-cut number 2 prospect. Trevor Lawrence is an A-plus prospect. I think Justin Fields is an A-minus prospect. I think he is that good. I think he is franchise-changing, and I think Justin Fields can potentially be a guy that you can do what you're doing to Sam Darnold right now if you're the New York Jets. You're handing him crap weapons. You're handing him, they have a good offensive line with Mekhi Becton, but not a good offensive line as a whole. Terrible defense, bad coaching, complete dysfunction, New York media. You can give that to Justin Fields, and he will give you something. I know Trevor Lawrence can do it. I'm not positive Justin Fields can, but I think he gives you a better chance of doing that than a guy like Sam Darnold. Not to mention you're going to have to wonder if you're going to pay Sam anytime soon. Things like that. So I do think Justin Fields is the right pick for New York. He can handle the media. He's handled the pressure at Georgia when he was the number 1 recruit coming out of there. And then, of course, now at Ohio State. And who knows, he might be winning the national championship when it's all said and done in a few short weeks. So I think Justin Fields is the perfect match for the New York Jets. Then we have the Miami Dolphins. Again, there are quarterback questions. Some of these teams on this list might have a future guy in mind, but they're not. There's questions. There's rumors that they're not sold, or it's unclear how they finish their season. And Tua Tagovailoa unfortunately fits that description. He had a bad end to the year after starting his career off on fire. He had a great start. He won a lot of games for this Miami Dolphin team, but those last 2 weeks against the Raiders and the Bills were ugly, to say the least. And I don't know if he's going to be moved off of this offseason, but I think the perfect match for the Miami Dolphins and their quarterback is still Tua Tagovailoa. Again, 7-2, or I think it's 7-3 wins to losses when he starts the game. I understand he didn't win them every game. Ryan Fitzpatrick won them that Raider game. So if you want to take that away from him, he was 6-3 as an NFL starter. If you want to say that Raider game doesn't really count. 14 total touchdowns to 5 total interceptions, but 2 of those weren't really his fault, in my opinion. I still think Tua Tagovailoa is the future in Miami. I think a lot of people are overreacting. And if Miami wasn't picking 3rd because of that incredible incredible Houston Texans trade that they made for Laramie Tunsil and Kenny Stills, this wouldn't even be a discussion. But since the fact they are picking 3rd and they might have the access to a guy like Zach Wilson or Justin Fields, or hey, maybe even Deshaun Watson like we talked about in the first segment, there's going to be rumors, there's going to be questions. But at the end of the day, I believe Tua Tagovailoa is the Miami Dolphin quarterback in 2021 and beyond, just like GM Chris Greer has been saying. So keep it short and sweet. I don't think the Miami Dolphins should move off of Tua Tagovailoa, and while there might be questions, I still think he is the guy moving forward. Moving on from the Miami Dolphins, we have the next really obvious team that's going to be looking for a quarterback next year, the Indianapolis Colts. We know Phillip Rivers is retiring at the end of the year no matter what happens during this Indianapolis playoff run. We know that this Colts roster is absolutely stacked with some playmakers like Michael Pittman, T.Y. Hilton, Jonathan Taylor. That offensive line's top 5 in the league, and that defense is obviously incredible with DeForest Buckner, Albert Flores, the defensive coordinator, of course. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go in the direction of quarterback, but in my my opinion, their perfect match is still Carson Wentz. I've talked about it many times. Again, Deshaun Watson would obviously be perfect, but it's unrealistic in my opinion that they trade him to a division rival, specifically the Indianapolis Colts. It just does not make sense for Houston. But at the end of the day, Carson Wentz, with Frank Reich, was an MVP candidate, coached him at his best, and knows how to put Carson Wentz in positions to succeed at an MVP type level. Will Carson Wentz ever return to that MVP type level? In my opinion, no, just because of the confidence that he's clearly been killed over the last couple of seasons and the injury concerns as well. But can Frank Reich get Carson Wentz to at least live up to his contract, maybe beyond, make him a Pro Bowl type quarterback, make him not lead the league in interceptions? I really do believe he can do that. So I think the perfect matchup for the Indianapolis Colts after they move off of a guy in Phillip Rivers, who will most likely retire at the end of the year, is to sign a guy in Carson Wentz, or trade for, I should say. He's not going to get cut, most likely. He's most likely going to have to be acquired via trade. So the Colts, in my opinion, should go after Carson Wentz. Now, moving on to the Carolina Panthers, I really do believe that Zach Wilson could be their guy here. Justin Fields is another name I mentioned if the Jets decide to go Zach Wilson, but Zach Wilson has shown that he is mobile, operates in a really good offensive system that's more college-based than pro, and if Joe Brady hangs around and stays with the Carolina Panthers and doesn't take a head coaching job or isn't offered one, I think Zach Wilson is their guy. He's a guy who's thrived in college football. To a lot of that coaching staff, Matt Rule, again, Joe Brady comes from college, knows how the college scheme works. Really young team, makes a lot of sense in my opinion. So Zach Wilson to the Carolina Panthers is a perfect match in my opinion. Now let's get to the Washington football team. Just won the NFC East. Ron Rivera has clearly identified a culture in that organization, and things are shifting in Washington, an organization that's usually surrounded by drama and overall bad vibes, bad news. Things are sort of flipping the script here. Deshaun Watson is a name that would be absolutely perfect for them as well. I didn't mention them in my last segment because their money situation is interesting, but again, they're going to have to pay guys like Terry McLaurin. Eventually, I know he's a rookie, but Chase Young, you want to pay sooner rather than later. Some of these other guys. I don't know how enticing maybe Washington is to Deshaun, specifically with their lack of weapons. But hey, who knows? Another guy that comes to mind, in my opinion, is Trey Lance. He's another young NFL quarterback prospect. Reminds me a lot of Cam Newton. Ran for over 1,000 yards. I think through either 25 or 35 touchdowns and no picks. He's not a D2 guy, but he is an FCS guy. Went to the same North Dakota State as Carson Wentz. He's a guy that makes a lot of sense in Washington, specifically with Ron Rivera's success with a big mobile quarterback in Cam Newton, Carolina. I would keep an eye on Trey Lance and Washington. But if Deshaun Watson does become available, wouldn't surprise me at all if Washington were interested in him as well. Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. A couple of names option here. Deshaun Watson again, like I've mentioned. Trey Lance, as I just mentioned, makes a lot of sense in the draft. But I think Matt Ryan is this perfect match for them. If I had to say one of them, Matt Ryan. I think the Falcons are going to move off of Matt Ryan, maybe Julio Jones as well. Their owner, Arthur Blank, wasn't really committed to Matt Ryan in his most recent interview. San Francisco makes a ton of sense. Kyle Shanahan and him obviously had immense success in Atlanta. Obviously went to a Super Bowl, won a ton of games. That just makes too much sense in my opinion. Not maybe as the long-term future, but sort of a Phillip Rivers type 1 year, 2 year sort of thing in San Francisco. The perfect link for me there is Matt Ryan in San Francisco. Next up, we have the Steelers, who Big Ben may or may not retire at the end of the season. There's been no rumors about it, but there also hasn't been any commitment from Ben that he's staying for the long haul. A guy that makes a lot of sense to me is Sam Darnold here. Sam Darnold, whether he starts next year or not in replacement of Big Ben or backs up Big Ben next year if he doesn't retire, needs a culture change. Go to Pittsburgh, an organization that has had the same ownership, the same GM, the same coach for the better part of Sam's life, really, if you want to think about it. Get him some guys who are always going to be open, weapons, Samuel, Ebron, Juju if they re-sign him, obviously Chase Claypool as well, a running back in James Conner, decent enough offensive line, and that star-studded defense. Mike Tomlin, incredible coach. Stability is what Sam Darnold needs. And Steelers can offer that maybe more than any other organization in the entire league, so the perfect matchup for the Steelers, if Big Ben retires or not, is Sam Darnold, in my opinion. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints. Their guy for me is still Taysom Hill. They have him on the roster. They've already paid him. I think they went 4-1 with him as the start of the season. Why not let him get 1 year in there? They're an absolute cap hell moving forward. They're not going to be able to add a guy like Carson Wentz or Matt Stafford, who I'll talk about in a minute here. Taysom Hill, in my opinion, already on your roster. Maybe bring back Jameis Winston as well and have them duke it out. But Taysom Hill, in my opinion, should at least be the starting quarterback of the Saints next year after Drew Brees retires at the the end of the season, so that's my perfect link for them. And then we have the New England Patriots, who obviously have quarterback concerns, and it's been already reported that they're moving off of Cam Newton. Two guys make sense here for me. Jimmy Garoppolo, who I think they will go after. He's not my perfect link, but if I'm being completely realistic, that's who I think they get. Wouldn't surprise me if San Francisco cuts or trades him. A reunion in New England makes a little bit too much sense here. A guy like Trey Lance makes sense in the draft as well as Kyle Trask or Mac Jones potentially as well. But at the end of the day, I think the perfect link would be Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford knows how to play with no weapons, give him the best defense and best coach he's ever had, and watch Matt Stafford take off. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think New England is a type of team that moves off of draft picks like that and draft capital and makes these types of trades. But Matt Stafford would be the perfect link, in my opinion, to the New England Patriots. But I still believe it will be Jimmy G. And the final two I have for you are the Bears and the Falcons. For the Falcons, if they do move off of Matt Ryan, all these same draft prospects I've been mentioning, Zach Wilson, Fields if he falls, Sam Darnold, all of these same guys. I don't really have a perfect match for them, because it's unclear their plans going forward. That's what I would do if I were the Falcons, though. And finally, for the Bears, I think their perfect match is Mitch Trubisky, man. Him and Matt Nagy somehow work. They win games. They're going to the playoffs this year. And for whatever reason, Mitch Trubisky decided to ball the F out this year. I think he deserves at least one more chance next year. I could also see them drafting a guy like Mac Jones, Kyle Trask, going after Stafford, Jimmy G as well. So that was my sort of Tinder/dating show game. Perfect link, perfect matchup, whatever you ever want to call it, with teams with quarterback questions and some quarterbacks who will be available this offseason. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I'll be giving you my predictions for each and every Saturday NFL game. I'll tell you who I have winning and why. We'll get into that great stuff right after this short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just matched up some of these teams that might be looking for a quarterback next offseason with some, of course, quarterbacks who will be on the market next year, or at least rumored to be on the free agent market / trading availability / the draft. I hope you guys enjoyed that. For this segment here, in some quick time, because we are running out of time, I do want to give you my predictions for all three of the games on Saturday for the NFL playoffs. I want to tell you who I have winning and why, because again, you won't hear from me again until Sunday when we already know the results of those three playoff games. So let's get right into it. The first one being that 1 o'clock game, Buffalo versus Indianapolis. Obviously, I believe Buffalo is going to win. I think Buffalo and Kansas City are on a different level than everybody else right now. Just in the NFL in general, I do like some of these NFC teams. I like Tampa. I like Green Bay. I like Seattle. And even some of these AFC teams, I do. I like Indianapolis. I think they're a tough physical team. But I think the Bills are just on another level. They're 6-point favorites. I think the game might be closer than people think, if I'm being honest with you. It is a playoff game. Josh Allen's only played one of those before. It is in Buffalo. If I had to guess, it's between a 3-point game and a touchdown game. I don't think Buffalo blows the doors off of Indianapolis. Frank Wright's too well respected. Phillips played too many playoff games. Hasn't won a lot of them, but has played too many playoff games. And this Colts defense is really good, specifically that defensive front with DeForest Buckner. I think it's closer than people think. I don't think this is going to be a blowout game, but I do have to give it to Buffalo. I think they start off their playoffs with a win. Josh Allen gets his first career win in the playoffs, and they advance to the second round. Again, I just think Buffalo is on a different level along with Kansas City than everybody else. Josh Allen's playing with extreme confidence. I think they're that Hail Murray play away versus the Cardinals. I think that if that play didn't happen, I really do think that they would have won 9 straight, I'm pretty sure, if my math is correct on that one, which is absolutely crazy to think about. They are the hottest team in football. I think they keep rolling over the Colts, but don't be surprised if it's a closer game than people think. The Colts have a really good run game. They can keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands and make the game closer and closer, and the longer the Colts hang around, the closer the game gets towards the end of it. And again, Josh Allen is new to this whole playoff thing, but I do think the Bills get it done on 1 o'clock on Saturday. Then we have the Rams-Seahawks game. Now it is unclear who's going to be playing quarterback for the Rams, I believe. It's either going to be John Wolford again, or it's going to be Jared Goff. Now these two teams played each other earlier in the year. They were close, and again, it's going to be a good game, I believe. The first time these two teams met, Seattle lost. I think it was 23-16. They lost in November against them, and then I don't know what happened later on in the year, and I think they won later on in the year, correct me if I'm wrong, 20-9. So they split the season series. I'm going to have to give it to the Seahawks. Again, they are at home. On top of all that, their pass rush has gotten a lot better, and if Jared Goff even is going to play, he'll be playing with a broken finger on his hand, obviously, what I believe his throwing hand. So the Seahawks are 3.5-point favorites. I'm actually going to say that they win by more than that. I think they win by a touchdown, specifically if John Wolford's playing. If Jared Goff's playing, I still like the Seahawks because of that injury. Their defensive line has gotten way better with the addition of Carlos Dunlap, which he didn't play in their first matchup, but obviously played in their second matchup where Seattle had won. And when Jared Goff is uncomfortable, he decides to turn the ball over and bad things happen. And at the end of the day, I think in the playoffs, I think in cold Seattle, that's what's going to happen to Jared Goff if he even does play. If Wolford plays, there's no discussion. Seattle's winning. But if Goff does find a way to play, which I believe he will, cold Seattle with a hurt hand and that pass rush that is greatly improved with Jamal Adams flying all around the field, not a good recipe for the Rams and Jared Goff. I think they lose this one. I think the Seattle Seahawks win by a touchdown is my guess over the LA Rams. And the night game is obviously Tampa Bay versus Washington. Tampa Bay's an 8-point favorite. I do think Tampa Bay's going to win. Obviously, Washington isn't even a winning team at this point, but this game's going to be way closer than people think. I think all 3 of these games are going to be close, but that defensive line for the Washington football team is no joke. Chase Young is legit, obviously. He's going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Montrez Sweat is legit. Ron Rivera is a legit defensive coach. And just the entire overall defense is really, really good for Washington. That is the reason why they're in this playoffs. They're in the playoffs, period. Are they going to beat Tom Brady and the Bucs? No. But that's not the goal of this. I mean, it's the goal of their team, but they shouldn't even be in the playoffs, arguably. They're playing with house money at this point. But this defensive line is going to give Brady some issues. Brady is not mobile. This offensive line isn't the greatest. And we have seen that when Brady is under pressure, ever since he's joined the Bucs, they lose games. When Brady is uncomfortable, they lose games. And specifically against the Saints, they lose games badly. I do think Brady finds a way to win, but don't be surprised, specifically in the first half, if Washington has a lead at some point, and that this game is a lot closer than people think. I don't think Washington has the offense at the end of the day to win the game, but I don't think they win this game by more than, by 8 points or more like the spread says. I think they're going to win this game maybe by a touchdown max at the end of the game because of some garbage time points, but this game will be a lot closer than people think, specifically in the first half, and this defensive line might give Tom Brady absolute fits. I wouldn't be surprised about it at all. So at the end of the day, I have the Bills, Seahawks, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers all winning and advancing. I know it's lame. I picked all of the favorites, but I really do believe that Saturday is going to be an action-packed day of football, and a lot of the games are going to be closer than we think. But I do think Sunday is the real day that we're going to see some of the really good action. Sunday, there's Ravens, Tennessee, Chicago, New Orleans, and of course that game, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh. That game's going to be absolutely electric. But you won't hear from me again until Sunday So I'll tell you, hopefully for that episode, I'll break down everything from the Saturday games. But the playoffs are starting Saturday, and again, I think the Bills, Seahawks, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers all get it done. And it's going to be interesting to see where the playoffs go from there. But again, that Washington defensive front, man, don't be surprised if that game is close. I think that might be the closest game of all three of these. Seriously, that defensive front might give Tom Brady fits. We know Ron Rivera isn't a good head coach. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's a playoff caliber head coach as well. Bruce Arians hasn't been there too many times. Ron Rivera might have actually been there more. I'm not positive on that stat. I know Tom Brady's got the experience, but Tom Brady has never won back-to-back road playoff games. I'm not saying he won't win this road playoff game, but it's going to be interesting to see. And that defensive line is hungry. This young Washington team is hungry, specifically on defense. They want to get after Brady. Don't be surprised if it's closer than people think. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this final short break, Bradly Beal dropped 60 in a loss. Should he request a trade? Where could he go and why? We're going to get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network for a quick and final segment of today's absolutely packed show. I wanted to talk about Bradly Beal. So everyone is speculating a little bit about what Bradly Beal should decide to do with his future. Obviously, the trade talks are going to be headlined with James Harden, who it appears is a little bit at a standstill with Houston. He's been playing with the team, doesn't seem thrilled to be playing with the team, but nevertheless, he is still playing with them. Eventually, he will get traded. I'm not sure to where. The rumors are kind of dead at this point. But about 2 nights ago, when you're listening to this, Bradly Beal dropped 67-5 in a loss to the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Washington Wizards have dropped to 2-6 in the Eastern Conference after trading for Russell Westbrook. Bradly Beal should want out. He signed the extension. He didn't want them to trade John Wall. They ended up trading John Wall for Russell Westbrook. It's already off to a rough start, and when Bradly Beal is dropping 67-5 in 38 minutes in a loss, and this is how it's going to be for Bradly Beal. It's already been this way for the last 2 years. He needs to move on. The perfect team that makes sense is the Miami Heat. Now, the Miami Heat are always involved in every single trade rumor for Harden, for whoever, but they're the big team that everyone expected to make a move this offseason, including myself, and they didn't make one. Maybe that move is Bradly Beal. They're off to a slow start at 3-4. Tyler Hero is a good player, and I believe still has the ability to develop into that star player Miami thinks he can develop into, but even he's off to a slow start this year, and some people are questioning how legit was his bubble run when he went off in the Eastern Conference Finals and everything like that. If I'm Miami, you want to try to find a way to get Bradly Beal. He's 25 years old, and he might be 26 now. You still have plenty of years before he even hits his prime, 2 years before he hits his prime, and then you have all the years after that as well. Already locked up long-term when you give him that contract extension. And Jimmy and Bam both came out and said, we have to get this fixed sooner rather than later. Not pressuring the organization to make a move or anything like that, but they're just overall not happy with the current performance of the team. They have a lot of depth and young guys they can move. Precious Achiuwa, Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, maybe even Duncan Robinson if you have to throw him in there as well. Get a guy from like Bradly Beal from Washington and let Miami get back to the championship contender level that they might already be at. Don't get me wrong. They're only off to a 3-4 start. It's extremely early in the season. I'm not writing off the Miami Heat. But what I do know for a fact that a big three of Jimmy, Bam, and Beal is the best trio in the entire league and will put them at the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, specifically with Bradly Beal dropping numbers like 67-5 against one of the better defensive teams in the league, Philadelphia. That's just my 2 cents on everything Bradly Beal. Some other teams that could be interested, I think the New York Knicks should go after him. They're off to a hot start. Denver could be interested. Chicago could be interested. Take your pick, right? And any of these teams might be interested in a guy like Bradly Beal, who again dropped 67-5 in a loss. Give him better coaching, a better organization, more talent. Not these guys like Russell Westbrook and Scott Brooks as their head coaches. It's just not working. They haven't made the playoffs in a couple of seasons. And again, Bradly Beal did this all started when they traded John Wall. Bradly Beal did not want them to trade John Wall. They're extremely close on and off the court. They did it for Russell Westbrook. It's not working. They're 2-6. It's looking like they're going to miss the playoffs. They're worse than I thought they would be. I thought they would try to find a way to sneak into the playoffs. I wasn't completely sure they would, but now it looks like they're going to be worse than everybody even imagined them to, and it's not Bradly Beal's fault. Wouldn't be surprised at all, man. Specifically with his most recent quotes where he was saying like, oh, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I think he was just more like, I'm pissed. Stats don't matter. I just want to win. And he's not going to be able to win in Washington. And I think deep down he knows that. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he requested a trade sooner rather than later. Maybe he might not even wait till the offseason. He might do it next week, for all we know, if the Washington Wizards keep losing. The Miami Heat make the most sense to me. But again, I've said that for a lot of other teams, and they haven't made a move just yet. But teams like New York make a lot of sense. Denver as well. Charlotte, any of these fringe potential playoff teams looking for a spark, looking for a face of the franchise, could make sense to look at a guy like Bradly Beal, who again is not winning despite dropping again 67-5, which is absolutely ridiculous for any NBA player to do. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, please do not forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, I have been your host, Alex Masser. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you all on Sunday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.